Hola, bienvenidas a todas aquellas personas que continúan con nosotros en esta serie de jornadas que hemos titulado El arte de los títeres, dramaturgia, divulgación y memoria. Continuamos con una serie de discusiones, charlas y presentaciones de libros y revistas en torno justamente a estos tópicos: la dramaturgia, la divulgación y la memoria en torno al arte de los títeres. Y bueno, recordarles que este ciclo de charlas y de discusiones surge con el objetivo justamente de visibilizar en un primer momento el trabajo de grandes investigadores, de grandes creadores, de grandes directores, de grandes editores de revistas que están haciendo una labor importante en distintos países, en distintos lugares del mundo, para que nosotros podamos tener acceso como memoria y como archivo a todo este trabajo. Y bueno, nos complace que a lo largo de todas estas sesiones hemos tenido, ¿verdad?, la presencia de personalidades con una amplia trayectoria y que definitivamente nos dan cuenta de todas estas coincidencias que tenemos pues entre todos los países que están uniéndose con nosotros. Y bueno, el día de hoy, justamente continuando con esta serie de discusiones, tendremos una charla muy interesante en torno a dos libros maravillosos. El primero, Leyendo, el escenario del títere, reflexiones sobre dramaturgia del objeto performativo. Y me da muchísimo gusto darle la bienvenida a su autora, a Claudia Orenstein. Y también, por otro lado, nos acompaña Colette Searls, quien está o estará contándonos un poco acerca de su libro Una galaxia de objetos, el poder del títere y la máscara en Star Wars y más allá. Y para ello, para continuar fomentando este diálogo y esta discusión, nos acompaña también Susi López, quien es parte de la Asociación Mexicana de Formas Animadas. Y bueno, les quiero contar un poquito sobre la trayectoria de Susi López. Ella es directora de teatro, productora, dramaturga, actriz y titeretera, y además es editora en jefe de una revista latinoamericana justamente sobre el arte del títere. Además es consejera internacional para la UNIMA, la Unión Internacional de la Marioneta, es colaboradora con su Comité Internacional de Publicaciones y traduce también para la Enciclopedia Mundial del Arte del Títere, cuyas siglas en inglés son la UEPA. Ha recibido diferentes premios como Héroe Desconocido y Ciudadano Distinguido, como impulsora de la educación y la equidad social a través de las artes. También ha recibido la medalla Forjadores de Puebla por su trayectoria artística, y sus cortometrajes se han presentado en 5 continentes, ganando premios internacionales como Mejor Espectáculo para Adolescentes en Buenos Aires, en Argentina, Mejor Dirección en Chile, Mejor Guionista en Brasil, cortometraje de animación en Colombia y talento creativo aquí en México. Así que bueno, les doy la más cordial bienvenida a nuestras 3 invitadas y cedemos la palabra a Susi López para que a su vez ella nos platique un poquito sobre la trayectoria de nuestras invitadas, Colette Searls y Claudia Orenstein. Susi, bienvenida.
Adriana, muchísimas gracias por esta bella presentación. Ahora yo me voy a permitir presentar a nuestras invitadas que tienen una trayectoria y unos reconocimientos sumamente importantes. Claudia Orenstein es profesora de teatro en el Hunter College y el Graduate Center, el centro de posgrados de la Universidad de Nueva York, CUNY. Lleva casi 2 décadas escribiendo sobre el arte del títere contemporáneo y tradicional en Estados Unidos y Asia. Es autora de el libro que hoy presentamos, Leyendo, el escenario de los títeres, reflexiones sobre la dramaturgia de los objetos performativos, y coeditora de, ha escrito varios libros, coeditado muchos otros. Entre ellos está El títere y el espíritu, relativo a los rituales, religiones y objetos performativos. Un libro muy interesante que tiene es el de Las mujeres y el arte del títere, investigaciones críticas e históricas. Tiene un próximo por salir a la luz que se llama Obteniendo significados de los títeres, materia, práctica y percepción. Es editora de la revista en línea Puppetry International Research de los Estados Unidos, que se refiere, por supuesto, a la investigación sobre el arte del títere internacional. Es editora asociada de el Asian Theatre Journal, una publicación asiática muy importante sobre las artes escénicas, y también es miembro de la junta directiva de UNIMA Estados Unidos. Para los que recién se incorporan con nosotros, hago este pequeño paréntesis. La UNIMA es la Unión Internacional de la Marioneta, una de los gremios escénicos más antiguos del mundo, por supuesto en torno al arte del títere, y que bueno, está por cumplir casi 100 años. Claudia entonces ha recibido reconocimientos y becas, entre ellos la de investigación Fulbright en el periodo 2021-2022 para investigar sobre el teatro de marionetas ritual en Japón. Y bueno, Colette Searls, bienvenida. Ella es profesora de teatro en la Universidad de Maryland, en el condado de Baltimore, en Estados Unidos, donde ha dirigido más de 20 producciones, entre las que se incluyen obras galardonadas de teatro de títeres. Ha recibido becas de la Fundación Jim Henson, del Consejo de las Artes del Estado de Maryland y de Puppeteers of America, que es una asociación, un gremio titeril muy reconocido en los Estados Unidos. Y este reconocimiento lo ha recibido por sus obras originales en títeres y con objetos encontrados. Colette ha publicado y dado conferencias sobre las intersecciones entre el teatro de marionetas, la animación y los efectos especiales, y es autora de Una galaxia de cosas, el poder de los títeres y las máscaras en Star Wars y más allá, que por cierto ganó el premio Nancy Staub de Publicaciones 2024. Es miembro antiguo de la junta directiva de UNIMA Estados Unidos y actualmente es editora de reseñas de espectáculos para la revista Puppetry International Research que mencionamos hace rato. Así que un panel estupendo, y bueno, pues nos gustaría comenzar con esta... con lo que ustedes tienen que compartirnos, chicas, porque para introducir un poco a nuestro público en este arte de los títeres y del objeto, siempre ha habido muchos cuestionamientos, muchas dudas, ¿no? Desde las filosóficas de qué es un títere y si cobra vida o es una cuestión técnica, la animación, etcétera, hasta dónde están estos límites con el teatro de objetos, ¿no? Es difícil de repente para el público en general y a veces hasta para los artistas determinar cuándo un objeto ha sido es algo utilitario, esa parte es la más fácil, pero cuando se utiliza de manera artística siempre hay cuestionamientos en cuanto a el momento en que pertenecen al mundo del títere. To our guests, we're very glad to have you here, and I bet you have a lot of interesting things to share with us. I would like to begin with Claudia, because I bet you have very interesting opinions to share with us about the performative object. There is a fine line. What is the difference between the puppet, the object, and all these boundaries on the stage that can be even confusing for most of the spectators or even some performers? What can you tell us about the performative object?
Well, I have a very broad view of puppets and performing objects. I include pretty much any object or image on stage that is given some kind of agency. And I guess in concert with a colleague of mine, Dacia Posner, I think about a term she coined, material performance, that actually looking at the stage when there are performing objects, what it does is it sensitizes you to all the kinds of material that is expressive on stage. So for my own work and my own interests, I am less interested in specific distinctions between making a fast rule between what's a puppet or what's an object and what's other kinds of material performance on stage, and rather thinking dramaturgically about the way in which all the elements on stage are expressive, and how once you start paying attention to objects and materials, it shifts your sensibilities of what you're looking at on stage. And I would say I'm also being led in in that direction because at least puppeteers in the United States and in New York, a lot of the puppetry that I see is very much going in that direction. I think I first became excited about puppetry because I was seeing performances that included objects and projections and imagery and materials and human actors, but the human actors weren't the center. And all of these have become encompassed in the world of puppetry.
This is a very interesting point of view. Do you consider as materiality as part of the objectry world, so to speak, multimedia, all this digital world? Could you consider it?
Yes, I think so. And I think Colette has a lot more to say about the digital world and puppetry than I do. But I mean, I think, so first of all, I take a lot of cues from what excites puppeteers. And what I see is puppeteers who are including animation as part of their practice and within their shows. And in my book, I have a chapter called The Image Aspect of the Puppet. And in that chapter, I have a chart that sort of tries to sort out how objects are related to things like film and animation and other kinds of media, and the way in which they overlap. So, for instance, you have shadow puppets that are a kind of projection, and then you have stop motion puppetry on film, and you have animation, which is, it's drawings in motion. So these things all kind of overlap and make a kind of web, I guess, that interconnect.
Okay, that seems excellent because it certainly establishes kind of a structure as to how to approach the stage, both as a spectator, how do you read it, and as a performer, you can also have different approaches within the creation. But in this sense, how does your book comes to exist, comes to life?
How did I come to write this book? Yes, well, I got very excited about over 20 years ago about puppetry, coming from a theater background. Professor of theater, I teach in a theater department, and the puppetry was the most interesting theater I was seeing. And I was really excited to try and think about it. And I was seeing a lot of productions here in New York, and they made me ask different questions than the theater productions I was seeing. And I felt like I didn't have, at the time, the kind of critical tools the critical tools that I had from theater weren't really working to help me understand objects that might be very beautiful, but maybe didn't have as much dialogue or a lot of dialogue that didn't go with the objects, or just strange things that were on stage and the way they mixed together. And so I kind of personally set out on a quest to sort of figure out who was writing about this. And I was not finding as many people as I had hoped, and trying to figure it out myself and writing about it. And so I ended up in the puppetry world and teaching also about puppetry. So when I teach puppetry in the theater department, I have a lot of students. Most of my students were coming from a theater background. And so I really felt it was important. This book comes out of an interest in trying to help people. And also, I would say that one more thing is that people are always asking me, people in puppetry or theater or all kinds of people that I know, like, why are you so interested in puppets? Why are you doing so much about puppetry? So the book is really I think of it as an introduction to puppetry, not from the point of view of how to manipulate a puppet or how to build a puppet, which is most introduction to puppetry books, but rather the point of view of how we watch puppetry. And part of it is to help explain to people, especially in theater, but in other fields as well, and people who would ask me why I find puppetry so interesting. What is there to look at? What is there to consider? How does its meaning expressed on stage? And to help people sort it out. I would say the other reason is that two other reasons. One is this is sort of all the information in this book is the things I hope that my students would get after my puppetry class. Like, this is what you should come away with. And finally, that there are a lot of people in theater who are now, I mean, puppetry is very popular right now in New York especially. And so there's a lot of theaters, Broadway theaters, everybody who's trying to put puppets in their shows. And if you don't really understand what you're doing once you put a puppet on stage, it's not just about replacing an actor with a puppet or about just putting in something that's kind of spectacle. It really changes the way we appreciate and are understanding and express and accepting meaning on stage. And so the book is also about explaining that to people and trying to get people sensitized to what do you need to look at? How do you approach a puppetry show, whether you're an artist creating something and having puppets involved, or you're a spectator watching or coming from some other field?
That is so important, really, because actually all the signs mean something, and they can mean different things according to the relations they keep with the rest of the stage, with the puppeteer. So this is a whole world that deserves as much study as you're giving it, and even more. So both books, Colette and Claudia's, both your books, in their own way, they provide models for analysis on puppetry. So, can you both describe what those elements are, roughly, like the structure of analysis, and what elements do you feel are most important about this? The academic principles, or the things you're sharing with us.
Well, maybe I'll let Colette respond. You can hear.
Let's give her the microphone. Your microphone.
Thank you. Yeah, we're building off each other. We a lot of us puppetry scholars in the United States, it's a small community, and we know each other and we build on each other's work. I found likewise Dacia Posner's coining of the term material performance very expanding and helpful. And I just sort of built on that by giving a noun to, I mean, that is a noun, but then I made a more concrete noun. I started using the term material characters in my book. And it already was being used by another scholar named Dr. Paulette Richard. She's an independent scholar who wrote a book called Object Performance in the Black Atlantic, which I highly recommend as well. And she said, Colette, keep using that term because it's helpful to me, because it's more than puppets. It's puppets and all their cousins, masks, prosthetics. And I thought, well, hang on, that's actually really helpful for film and television, because in film and television, there's so many creatures and robots and aliens and dragons and whatnot, but there's no name for what they are. These, and I say that like the non-humans, the semi-humans, and the concealed humans. And as Claudia said, they really are different. They really communicate differently. And so I wanted to introduce a term that I could use to hold them all together, and I call them material characters. And then I came up with a schematic to describe the powers of all material characters, because I read Claudia's work, I read Dacia Posner's, John Bell, many others, and I found them using terms that I liked, and I wanted to kind of collect them together in a way that I would remember. I heard words like hybrid and contrasting juxtaposition of distance, and I thought those are all really true ways that puppets communicate differently than human actors performing human characters on stage and in film. So I used the terms distance, distillation, and duality, in part because they're alliterative, the 3 Ds, and it's just easier for me to tell my students that I also teach theater and theory, and it's easier to remember, it's easier for me to remember, so that when I think to myself, and I just actually drafted an article this morning about this, about a puppetry artist named Tarish Pipkins Gigetto, who has a puppet robot in his performance that is really meaningful, and I think it's actually suggesting a new way of thinking about robotics. And so I use the 3 Ds to kind of say, all right, this is how distance is making this puppet so powerful. This is how it's distilled, and these are the dualities that it's using to create meaning and to make something, as Claudia said, so much more powerful, a statement, than just I'm a robot or I'm a dragon. These are really these non-human characters have a lot to say. So I wanted to help, as you say, honor them and their contribution to stories and themes and ideas.
This nomenclature is very interesting because within puppetry, there are classic terms that refer to the mode of operation. As for example, when you say duality, I tend to think about a collaboration, of a presence within the material performer or the material character or puppet and the performer. But when you talk about distance, I immediately think about letting the figure, the material character, stand out away from the performer or the animator, so to speak. But with distillation, you got me. Please explain the term.
Sure, and I'll just say, you saying duality, exactly what you're saying is what made me think of that. I actually categorize 5 dualities. They're all paradoxes, and one of them is what I call absent presence, which is what you just said, that there's always, when you're looking at a puppet, there's the request of the audience that you don't look at the puppeteer too much, you look at the puppet, but at the same time, you're being asked to consider that relationship, and it can be super meaningful. So that absent presence is one of the 5 dualities that's so powerful. Distillation is really simple. It just means that because a puppet is not a human character, like if I was to play Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, like this is what Juliet looks like, maybe with a little makeup and a wig. But if you have a Juliet puppet over here, she can look like anything. Like, you know what I mean? And then she could be super tiny. She could be enormous. She can be made of tinfoil. I mean, and you can be violent with her, and you can take her apart and put her back together on stage, and that's what the distance allows. But if she is made of tinfoil, or if she is really tiny, that distills down a particular idea. I use Yoda as an example. He's not just Yoda in Star Wars. He's not just an old man. He's like the distilled archetype of an old man, because he's not just short and stooped. He's like little, and he's not just has age spots. He's like green, like he's a giant wrinkle. You know what I mean? That's the distillation. It communicates an idea in a concentrated way because of the design.
It's like the very essence of the characters that take material shape, right?
Yeah.
Now that you touch the topic, Yoda and stuff, why? Explain us, why did you choose Star Wars? Because the world of puppetries and characters, why not Alien,
Sure.
But come on, let's get into the topic. Why Star Wars?
I hope the fans of Alien will find this interesting, because it's kind of the same stuff. I chose Star Wars in part because it's the most famous, right? It's like the most known across the world, most recognizable. I wanted to be able to say, okay, puppets are really powerful without having to point to a theater production that only I saw at a festival 10 years ago, right? I wanted to be able to point to puppets and masks and suit characters that I could say to almost anyone, and they would immediately call an image into their head. If I said Darth Vader to you, you know who that is. You know what that looks like. I could say
who my father is. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, so I wanted to speak that, and then on the flip side of that, I wanted to say, well, how come it is you know who Darth Vader is? How come it is? I mean, I have students now who were born like 25 years after. You know what I mean? Like, they still know who Yoda is. Why is that? And I argue it's because they're material characters, and I think and they're really good ones. So that's why I picked it. Also, I really like it. I was raised, I'm a Gen Xer, so I was raised on the original Star Wars. So it's very powerful and resonant to me personally.
Excellent. And it is powerful to many of us too. Claudia, before we move on the topics, a little more about your structure, your terminology.
Yeah. So I have I maybe less articulated kind of analytical terminology than Colette. More, it's about pointing people to what to look for. So like I start out with some of the things that Colette talks about. I think pretty much everybody in puppetry talks about, which is, okay, so what is the object? What kind of material is it made of? And Colette also mentioned the way you can, puppets are always a montage of some sort, as Jan Mrazek says, that the voice is never coming from the puppet, right? So there's always some kind of montage element. And in fact, the puppets invite us, and we get excited about helping to bring the elements together to make make a sense of a whole. I think that's part of what's exciting about the puppetry, the way it allows us in, and allows our imaginations in. And some productions will exploit that by actually having a lot of different pieces that come together. And if they can do that at a dramaturgically interesting moment in the show, it becomes extremely powerful. So my first chapter is really just talking about these basic things. It's called a puppet being is a puppet doing. It talks about also the motion of puppetry, that is the way that an object is brought to life and, gets character, and what they do is telling us our story. But then I wanted to move beyond that and say, well, but how do puppets then create story? I mean, I think there was a lot of writing about puppets versus human actors and what is a puppet and things like that. But how do we move into, people are creating productions. What does it mean for something to be meaningful over a course of a whole production? So the second chapter I have is called The Dramaturgy is in the Object. And this is where I try and I invite other scholars and interested people to also have their hand at this, because I was just trying to find my way through it. What is it that, how do objects make story? How do they unfold? And the idea that they could not only concretely distill an idea, as Colette's talking about, but also can do things that are the story. If at a moment your puppet grows wings, like that is an extraordinary transformation. And so if you think about that dramaturgically, what is that, where you think about, like in a theater play where the transformation is, how can you make that also concrete in the puppet? How is that built into the puppet, or into an object, or in the way objects are used? And so in that chapter, I look at a lot of different examples to try and think about, what is the beginning, middle, and end? What does it mean to develop an idea, through objects? Then I look at this thing called the image aspect of the puppet, because I do feel that on the one hand, the visuality of puppets is so expressive, but also, again, being led by puppetry that I've seen, really puppeteers were bringing a lot of images on stage, like two-dimensional images. So that chapter is all about two-dimensional image versus three-dimensional object, and things like the pop-up book, where the pages and images are two-dimensional and then they become three-dimensional. And, how is it that we read these different examples? Or one of my favorite examples is Claire Dolan, who's a wonderful puppeteer, has a performance that she does about picture storytelling, which is also a lot of traditions that people in puppetry really think of as part of puppetry, where people tell stories to a series of images. And she has festivals of these, and she introduces the festivals with a song she's written about the history. And she's wearing a dress, and she has on the dress images in all different parts of it that tell the story. And sometimes there are flaps that open that show another image. And so you have, in that kind of experience, sure, she's singing about it, but what we're watching is the object, which is her dress, the pictures on the object, and then the human body and the way it's turning. And so we're thinking about all the parameters of all of these things and how they are contributing to the expressive meaning in different ways. I then go on, sorry, just a little bit, I then go on, I have one on humans, the next chapter is on humans and objects, which Colette also alluded to a little bit. We sometimes think of puppeteers as either present or absent, but they can be present in a million ways, and every choice of how they're present is expressive.
Absolutely. And yes, I know I'm not letting you talk about every chapter because we're giving some mystery for the people. Hopefully they can go buy your book after these talks. But I don't know if it was thought purposely from the beginning or not, but it's certainly with your book, you're not only building audiences, like teaching them what to look at and stuff, but you're also giving a very important material for the creative people, for the artists.
Really, I hope so. Like, it would be my joy if people who are doing puppetry got something out of this book. I feel like sometimes some of what I say are things that good puppeteers instinctively kind of know. But yes, I've seen a lot of puppetry. Some of it's fabulous. Some of it, would be helped by some dramaturgical insights.
Not only that, because I mean, many of the things that are put on stage, they need to be put with a defined and smart direction. So this book is important for directing, for writing the plays, and also for being able to put a formal and smart critic of what you are seeing on stage, and then again promote the running of the wheel, that audiences see good projects taken to stage, and we go on and on and on. So to both of you, Claudia and Colette, both of you have spoken about your students. So in this sense, how has the reception been among the students and artists? Who is the biggest audience for your books? Colette.
Sorry, do you want to start, Claudia? You have those graduate students who lap it up. I know.
Yeah, you go ahead, Colette. You start first.
Okay, sure. I mean, I have several. You said students, then you asked audiences. I mean, of course, the publisher wants you to, have your students read the book and buy it, and I do adopt it for my students, but it's expensive, and these days students don't want to buy textbooks, so usually I require them to read a chapter or two. And I do teach a class on this topic. I've taught, I think, 4 seminars on it so far, and I'm teaching it again this fall. Right there it is. And so we look at, my students. They find it really fun to talk about. And these students are they're from all different disciplines. So I wrote the book not just to talk to theater people. I hope it's appealing to theater people and people in film and media studies. And in fact, among my readers of the original draft were my colleagues in the media studies and film departments at my university. And they were very helpful and gave great feedback, and they found it really useful. So, my audience is curious academics, intellectuals in all different fields. I hope it will have influence in the puppet theater field. I hope that my schematic, the 3Ds, is useful for people who need a quick shorthand, particularly in communicating to students, particularly undergraduates, who just need to know what's the difference between an actor and a puppet, and what am I reading here in a film, for example. I think it would be really great. I have been on some panels with the Star Wars writers and science and special effects people. And I hope that they'll find this useful. I find that when I'm in those groups, when I go to Dragon Con, which is like a big convention of fans, I tend to gravitate towards the panels that are more academic. Not because I want to speak a language that's inaccessible or erudite or anything like that. I mean, I like to use plain speak and talk across fields to everyone. But I find that it's people who are really want to talk analysis and want to have curious about, like, what does Darth Vader's mask really mean? Like, why is it so popular? Why do people respond to it the way that it does? Why is it the center of a story epic that lasts for 2 decades? Not just like, was he really Luke's father? And, the sort of questions about the story itself, which I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, I don't read the novels and the comic books and all the universe stuff. But I want to talk about, like, what is it? Why is it so powerful? And people can get really, really into that. And so I guess I would say that it's, intellectually curious Star Wars fans, puppetry artists who want to talk about puppetry, theater artists who want to talk about theater, media studies, media communication people who want to talk about pop culture. Those are the people who seem to really come to my talks and stick around with me after and buy the book.
Okay, before going back to you, Claudia, just another question for you, Colette. How do you envision this competition between the theatrical stage and the television? Obviously, talking about puppetry, animation, techniques, money.
You mean how the competition between them? Do you mean like the different styles that they use, or what do you mean exactly?
Because I tend to see this in other countries. I have seen this interest in stage artists to go right away into the television, because for survival nature, for having a better earning now that we are in the Netflix era and stuff. You both have spoken about this good stage panorama of these productions that are being watched now in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can you tell the young artists about the productions? What is the real competition, artistically speaking, between the TV and the theater in New York?
I think it's actually quite fluid. This is not an area of my research that I've pursued. I mean, I haven't done any statistical studies on how it's going in terms of the economics of the business. But I can tell you anecdotally, and I mean, it's really, really obvious, there are more material characters on your streaming service than anyone can count. There used to be a time when people would say to me, Colette, guess what? There's a new movie coming out next year with puppets in it, or and I cannot even now keep track. Not only can't I not watch them all, I can't even keep track of them all. So at the same time, on the theater end, I went to something called the O'Neill Puppetry Conference, which is held at the O'Neill Theater Center in Connecticut every summer. It's very popular. Members of the Henson family go. A lot of the Muppeteers from Sesame Street are there. And when I first went in, I think 2000 or 1999, I think it was perhaps, it was a small group of people. You know, it was maybe 30 of us. We all knew each other really well. We got to know each other. It was great. I went back in 2018. I could not, first of all, I had to apply to go, even though I was a professor and I published and whatever. I had to apply to go and like competitively. And then I had to like be in a lottery to eat. And like there was twice as much housing. It was like 3 times as many people there. It was totally crowded. I mean, and so I just feel like both the theater and the, and film and television, the whole media landscape is full of non-human characters. And what Claudia called a puppet moment several years ago does not seem to be a moment. It seems to be a trajectory, I think, towards including the non-human in fantasy and science fiction perennially. I think it's going to keep going. I think if one of my students said to me, I want to build puppets, or I want to be a special effects artist, I would say do theater and film and television. Go where the jobs are. Go do what you got to do. Don't see differentiation. It's all very similar. I say the same thing to actors, but I think when you're dealing with material, there's a very particular skill set that I think that is going to be in demand. I would hope in all of those arenas.
Okay, good. Claudia, there's 2 questions on your table. First of all, it was the one about your audience and the reception.
Yeah, so actually, I think what the book really does well, and what I've tried to do, is I think it's about shifting your brain to think like a puppeteer, which means that you see the expressivity of materials. So I think it's very good for anybody who starts to get interested in puppetry. I'm really glad that you said you felt it was really good for artists and people who are in puppetry, because already, and I think there's a lot that it can give them, a different way of getting into their art. Especially because I think there's a lot of teaching of puppetry, as I said, which is about how to manipulate, which is about how to build, but not so much about how to think about story and think about sort of the trajectory of a production. But that seems to come afterwards. And but I think it's really reaches out to people who are maybe in other fields, especially in theater, who have a theater background, interested in puppetry, but also in the visual arts or dance, or people who are coming from, there's a lot of fields that interact with puppetry. So anthropology, robotics, where people want to know more about puppets. So I think this is a wonderful book for introducing people to how to start thinking about it, how to find your way around the puppetry world. The introduction is a little bit about how I got into puppetry, but it's also kind of a map of all the venues and organizations and publications and things that there are through my journey, of discovery of these things. So I think it's a good kind of orientation to the world of puppetry and how much is out there. So I think anybody would be interested. It's written in a way that is meant to be very like me talking to my students.
Very fluid, I bet. And well, in this sense, and since Colette has already told us a little bit more about the theater and the movie scene in your country, how is the field of research within books like yours, Claudia?
Yeah, well, not only is the field, I mean, the field of puppetry is growing in every way in the United States right now. So there's a lot more people involved in puppetry and a lot more people writing about puppetry, and more scholarship. I've kind of made part of my mission since I started doing this to support and elevate and expand the critical writing on puppetry. And there's a whole field that's really grown up. And so there's a lot more people coming into it. And publications like the journal that I edit that you mentioned at the beginning, Puppetry Research, Puppetry International Research, that Colette also does the performance reviews, is a place to help scholars who want to write about puppetry find a place to publish. That's looked at in scholarship, and also making bridges between disciplines. I find that puppetry people have in the past, in my understanding, been a little bit isolated or self-isolating, like feeling a little marginalized. And my sense is that puppetry is at the center of everything right now. I mean, if we think about the importance of AI and robotics and animation and all the ways we animate things, animate through materials and through media, etc. Puppetry is at the center. It's the heart. It's the roots of all of that. And once puppeteers understand that, and that they're really at the center, and that people kind of see that, I think it's a really rich field to explore. And it's a way of looking into a lot of other fields. There's a wonderful scholar named Terry Silvio, and her book, Puppet Gods and Brands, Theorizing the Age of Animation from Taiwan, because she's an anthropologist who works in Taiwan. She says that the 20th century was an age where performance was the paradigm for how we looked at things in anthropology and in other fields. And she thinks that animation is the paradigm for the 21st century. And I feel like I agree with that.
Yes, that point of view is very interesting and carries a lot of truth. And I do agree with you that this wave of puppetry being insufflated within different layers of our cultures is now at a very good moment. Colette, there is a question that we were asked here, that what happens to the figure of the puppeteer when you can see it on screen? What can you tell us?
What happens to the figure of the puppeteer when you can see him or her on screen? Do you mean in like an artistic film where they actually allow that, as opposed to Star Wars where you never see them, where you never see the puppeteer, like you'll never see Frank Oz?
More related as to Star Wars, when the place that puppeteering gets to have within the film industry. Not being the material character, being in a smaller hierarchy. Is the puppeteer in a smaller hierarchy character in the movie industry, or is he as relevant as in the stage?
Oh, I love what you're asking. Okay, now I'm so sorry I didn't understand that at first. I think John Bell brought this up in his book, American Puppet Modernism. I think it was chapter 9. And this book is what launched me. It was many years ago, but this is kind of where it got started a long time ago. He really wanted to point out that, like, we always, in an animated film, for example, Billy Crystal played a monster in Monsters, Inc., right? He voiced the animated character. And they're like starring Billy Crystal, when in fact, he really, in some ways, did the smallest part of it. He acted the part, and that's huge. But all the animators and drawers and renderers and writers, none of them got anywhere near the credit that he did for being the voice. So we're very human-centric. We're very, we love our movie stars. We love our people. And this was a real issue in 1977, 1980, in the first Star Wars movies, that as much as a big hit they were, it was always Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, and not Anthony Daniels as this amazing C-3PO, right? You don't see him, out of sight, out of mind. They actually wanted to hide him at first, and now he's a big star, But I think it's changing. I think that the person behind the makeup, behind the mask, is definitely becoming more of a star than they used to be. I'm not proving my point by saying I don't remember his name, but there's an actor who's actually really known for the characters in like The Color of Water, is that what it was called? He was like the amphibious man. He's been that kind of character, and he's like the guy to go to for that. Actor Andy Serkis is known for doing digital performances, and he plays Snoke in Star Wars. But he also plays Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, and he plays the head chimpanzee in Caesar in what is it called? One of the Rises of the Apes, of the War of the Apes, or whatever. But so there's certain actors that are getting known for being able to do what I call material characters. I know they call them other things like performance capture and puppets and so on. When it comes to actual puppeteers, like the people who performed, say, the droid BB-8 in, I believe his name was Tompkins, in the more recent Star Wars films, they are absented. They're present in what they're doing, but they're absented by being cut out of the final performance. I don't think people really know who they are. Us in the puppetry community do, because we write articles about them and we like say hi to them at the puppetry conferences and they're all excited, but it's still kind of like the nerdy end. And I sort of like it that way. I mean, like stars are like the cool people, like the actors, and then there's the nerdy puppets who get to hide and be in our own little community. So the hierarchy, sure, no, they're not going to be where like movie stars are, but that's partly because movie stars are just like more extroverted and better at being on the red carpet, whereas puppeteers often, I think, kind of choose to be like let the material share the spotlight, or even have the spotlight entirely and not show themselves at all, right? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's something I've observed.
Yes, that is I can certainly agree with that even though we are still a little behind the shadows, but certainly the importance of the puppeteer or of the craft maker is growing among the stage, whichever stage we're talking about.
And I would just add, if I can, that there have been a couple of places like that have added awards, these award organizations for people who are puppeteers. I think there's a television award for puppetry in children's television right now in the U.S. and in the U.K. the puppeteers for Life of Pi won an Olivier Award, I think. So there's a little bit more recognition.
Yes, and that is very something that makes me very happy. Before our closing statements, Claudia, I know you have some images and there's much more content about your book. Would you like to to tell us more about it?
Okay, well, I'll share a few images. I have a number of images, but I won't show all of them. I'll just share a few here. This is the cover of the book. And actually, I thought maybe I could say a little something about it here. I know you wanted it a little bit bigger. Why I chose this book. This is from this image is from a company called Blind Summit. They're very well known for a production called The Table, which uses what's called a Bunraku-style puppet that is something that looks more like what we would think of as a puppet. And I like this for the cover of the book because the book is called Reading the Puppet Stage, and you get an image where there aren't actually anything that you would recognize as a puppet, and then there are things that you can actually read that are signs.
Literally read it.
Yeah. But there's something. So this is when I talked about the image aspect of the puppet. There's something going on in the imagery, but the way when you watch the puppet show, and you can kind of get a sense from this picture, the way they bring in those objects, how they move them around in relationship to each other. I mean, they treat them as objects, so they're also objects that are performing. And then we have the puppeteers that are also present, and they're giving. They have a kind of swagger style to them. They start the show by saying they are, doing French puppetry, and they have like cigarettes hanging out of their mouths, looking kind of, some kind of stereotype of cool. So there's all sorts of things. So what I hope is that the image sort of makes you wonder, like, what does it mean to read this, and what is this image about, and where am I looking, and how am I looking? So I wanted to just share that because I think it's a good way of thinking about that. And there's one more thing I'll share because this might be helpful. When I had talked about the charts that I had, you asked about animation and puppetry and the relationship of, these two things. Whoops, sorry. this is the chart that I put together, which shows like all the kinds of things that you might see in the world of object. So masks, obviously puppets, on the one hand, masks, robots, daily objects, ritual figures, and then there are stop motion figures, and then here in the middle, pop-up books. Toy theater. Which, if you know, that is, characters made out of paper, and shadow puppets. So we have all of these things that are sort of like drawings. Toy theaters, is almost like book kind of characters that I feel also can carry a lot more language, maybe because they're so two-dimensional. And then I don't know if you can see on the side here, we have picture storytelling, which is again a form of imagery and stories. And then we have images in motion, moving images, animation, film, and comics. So it's not a fully laid out kind of sense of how these are all connecting to each other, but I think the chart gives you a sense of the web of the way image and object are kind of interconnected and all of these things, and why they might form part of the same world, or why you would feel okay including them aesthetically in a theater production, a puppet kind of production that brings in all these different things. There's something aesthetically that connects them.
Excellent. I like all of these classifications. They kind of structure your mind to be a good both a good artist and a good spectator, integrant of the audience. So while we do our closing statements, we saw the QR where I guess we can buy Colette's book. Do you, Claudia, have a ways or a QR or something where we can access your book?
Yeah, I don't have a QR code, but you can find it on Amazon, I guess. And it's from Routledge Press.
Actually, you could use my QR code because we have the same publisher. Just go to Routledge, go to my QR code, and then just like search for another title. And you'll find it right there. Just search for those up with Claudia Orenstein.
Actually, I will say that Routledge, with Colette, myself, with Paulette's book, with there's a lot of puppetry books that they have out, which is really nice. Yeah,
they should offer a discount for libraries buying a whole bunch of them. But order them for your libraries. That's what I always tell people.
Excellent. So we are now in closing time. So what would you like to tell us for this closure regarding both your books? Colette.
Sure. I think that, order for your library, please. It's a short, easy book to read. It's a lot of fun, I think. It's accessible. It's not meant to be just for scholars. I would say my next, one of the things I say in my final chapter, I talk about like what droids mean specifically, and like how they're kind of treated as servants that people own. And it's like a model for servitude that actually comes from the way that people have historically treated owning people and sort of subhumanizing people in labor practices. And so I think it has a sociological aspect. And I've sort of turned that into my next area of research, which is into real robots, and how robots are, as Claudia said, they're, puppetry is actually the center of robotics. I just don't think robotics realizes it yet. And they're sort of following the same habit that pop culture has in creating robots that are based on like a C-3PO model, which is totally not helpful or truthful or realistic, and even good for us in a way, because C-3PO is like owned by masters, and you know what I mean? And he's, he's literally slave traded in the first film. So, and he's based on performance, which a robot is not generally. It's a tool. So that's my next area of research. And I was interviewed in a podcast called Sociology Ruins Everything, the most recent episode. And those are free. You can get that online. So if you want to hear me blather on about like puppets and robots, you can listen to that podcast for free. But that's where I'm heading next.
Excellent. Claudia.
Well, I guess one of the things I'd like to say is that at the end of my book, there's a selectively annotated bibliography. That is a lot. I have tried to I used to collect puppetry or relevant to puppetry books to have in my office to offer my students. So in the same way that this book is kind of like an offering to people who are starting doing this, or students or artists, I wanted to have all of these kind of listing of bibliography. So I think Colette's book and my book are really great introductions to a whole field. And if you want to read more, there's this whole bibliography of ways to kind of connect and make the deep dive, get into the puppetry world, and keep reading. My own research area also in more other specifics is more in traditional Japanese puppetry, especially puppets outside of, there's a very famous, wonderful tradition called the Bunraku theater, but there's also a lot of other traditions of puppetry in Japan that I've been investigating and working on. So that's where I'm going next. But each of the topics I think that we've talked about today and that are in those in that bibliography open a door to a whole world of discovery. So I think we have a tendency to kind of think of puppets as a very, minimized world, like, oh, there's all this stuff in theater you could spend forever, but then there's puppets is like, oh, you could visit it. But actually it's a whole world of exploration. So I hope all these other wonderful publications can also take you deeper into different areas.
Absolutely, I agree. Y permítanme decir esto en español, pero bueno, creo que esa es la importancia de las jornadas que estamos haciendo ahora. Por un lado, dar una mayor proyección al arte del títere, que justamente ha sido limitado previamente a una cuestión infantilista, ¿no? A pensar que solo es para los niños, cuando las mejores expresiones más artísticas, más elevadas, vienen estando dentro del teatro para adultos o dentro del cine, en fin, una exquisita serie de expresiones de las cuales mucha gente no se da cuenta, por lo que estos dos libros que ustedes nos presentan el día de hoy son una estupenda forma de detonar la curiosidad del público en general y también de los artistas, ¿no? Representan un punto de partida para seguir ahondando dentro del conocimiento del arte del títere y provocar que siga floreciendo, que tenga una mayor preeminencia dentro de las artes escénicas y una mayor importancia, ¿no? Un mayor respeto por parte de todos los públicos. Así que bueno, yo las felicito, les agradezco compartir su conocimiento con nosotros y también pues a Adriana y al Instituto Municipal de Arte y Cultura de Puebla. Les agradezco todas estas jornadas porque la relevancia de presentar todos estos libros, estas revistas, es que justamente tengamos unas referencias, acostumbremos a nuestros públicos a que tengan este punto de partida de libros y revistas que nos permiten hacer permanente todo el conocimiento o todas las experiencias y las prácticas que se tienen en torno al teatro de títeres. Nuestra actividad suele ser efímera, pasó la función y bravo, ¿no? A lo mejor entre colegas nos reunimos y ¿te acuerdas de tal función? Oye, ¿viste esta? Qué genial. Pero eso no queda, no trasciende dentro de décadas si es que no están guardados, codificados, representados en libros. Así que esta permanencia que le dan las revistas, los libros y jornadas como esta que nos permiten difundir el arte del títere a través del papel, pues son fundamentales para nuestro arte. Así que gracias al IMAC, gracias Adri, y bueno, pues ahora sí cerramos la sesión contigo, Adri.
Muchas gracias, Susi. Muchas gracias a Claudia Orenstein por esta maravillosa intervención y por acercarnos un poco a estos tópicos que tienen que ver justamente con la dramaturgia vista más allá de únicamente el objeto o los objetos. Muchas gracias también a Colette Searls, que sin duda nos abrió un panorama muy distinto para acercarnos al cine, ¿no? Evidentemente a través de Star Wars, pero también para tener otros ojos, también cuando nuevamente continuemos acercándonos al mundo cinematográfico. Muchas gracias a todas aquellas personas que nos siguieron en esta transmisión. Todavía continuamos, así que los invitamos nuevamente a seguirnos acompañando y por mi parte, muchas gracias nuevamente.
Gracias a ustedes.
Muchas gracias.
Gobierno de la Ciudad. Puebla, la capital imparable.